the school. Good morning to you, Prof. Good to have you.
Yes, good to have you too. Now, Dede, how are you?
I am
Good
well.
morning to our cherished listeners.
Good morning. Good morning. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Great. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Now, the IMF is asking or cautioning us as a country to be cautious with regard to the gains we are making. It says that the gains we have made so far are still fragile, and we must do our best to work towards, consolidating it. Essentially telling us that, we are not out of the woods yet. This is coming at a time where the finance minister, the president, they are pointing to figures from the Ghana Statistical Service that indicates that we have returned to pre-COVID time in terms of our growth. First of all, how do we marry this position of the IMF to that of, for instance, government?
This is not marriage made for each other. The position of government has always been at variance with the reality, and we have not missed the opportunity to point it out to Ghanaians that yes, some relative recovery, we have seen that we've made some modest progress, but we are not out of the woods, and the recovery we are celebrating is also not at pre-pandemic level. But in any case, nowadays, pre-pandemic level growth was not growth to be celebrated excessively in the first place. So even if we are saying that we have not returned to pre-pandemic growth, the pre-pandemic growth was not our ideal, optimal situation. We had pointed out to the government from 2017, and you can check the data and what we said, that yes, growth has returned much better than what it was in 2014, 2015, 2016, but we were mindful in pointing out that Ghana was growing far below its potential. So even though average GDP growth between 2017 and then 2019, probably around 6.5, 6.9%, it was still below, or we were growing far below our potential. And that once something like that was happening, what it meant was that the slightest shock to the economy, you will be exposed. We said that towards the end of 2019. So the pre-pandemic growth itself was not our optimal growth. It was not inclusive growth. It was not resilient in the first place. That said, let's look at the current growth trajectory and even compare that to pre-pandemic. You can see that, yes, we can say that the worst moments are over, but it doesn't mean that we have returned to pre-pandemic growth that would allow us to take our legs off the accelerator. We are not there yet. Of course, if you look at GDP growth, and as was also recently announced by the Ghana Statistical Service, we've seen some decent progress from that perspective. But that is GDP, driven also by price. But of course, if you look at the real GDP growth, we can say that yes, we've seen some good news from there, but it's not broad-based. And now let's go back to inflation numbers and why the president-elect must have a strategy to renegotiate the IMF supported program. I'll give you 3 reasons. If you look at inflation now, pre-pandemic growth, even if we choose the cutoff date to be December 2019, inflation was 7.9%. Inflation for November was given to us by Ghana Statistical Service as 23%. So look at the variance, huge. And then also if you look at food inflation pre-pandemic compared to post-pandemic food inflation, you can see we have not made, in fact, the situation has deteriorated. Now, let me come back to the IMF supported program and why it ought to be renegotiated substantially. First and foremost, we said when the program was approved that structurally, the program wasn't properly designed. Structurally. We made this clear in May 2023. Why? Because the burden of adjustment was disproportionately shifted to taxpayers across households and businesses. So if you see the pass-through of the fiscal consolidation cost in the immediate, it was so substantial that it actually changed the cost base of doing business in Ghana. I'll give you a reason. From November 2023, you realize that there was a divergence or misalignment, let me put it that way, between locally produced inflation and imported inflation. Until November 2023, imported inflation was higher than locally produced inflation. But because of the IMF program adjustment costs and the numerous taxes that were imposed, you realize that all of that, the costs passing through the financial statement of businesses and households contributed to a higher productive cost base of doing business. So from November 2023, you realize that locally produced inflation rose higher compared to imported inflation, and the gap kept widening. From November 2023, you can see the gap kept widening between locally produced inflation and imported inflation, which means that it was much expensive producing in Ghana compared to importing and even paying all the import levies and duties and all of that. So when it happens that way, you are actually undermining the competitiveness of your private sector and your businesses to produce and compete. So this is what the program has done. Now that they look at the real effect of the program, apart from the honeymoon effect of the program, which caused inflation to decelerate up to around 20%, and then also relative stability in the currency because of the zero financing as a result of the MOU between Bank of Ghana and Ministry of Finance and all of that. From November 2023 to now, the program has more or less hit a rock, with the exception of, let's say, GDP growth. Because if you see inflation from December 2023 to November 2024, there hasn't been much progress. Over almost 8-9 months, there hasn't been any much progress on decelerating price development. So that is one level. So structurally, by design, the program ought to be looked at again, so that we find a nice balance between sharing the adjustment costs with revenue, expenditure, and also prioritizing recovery of stolen money. Through governance reforms, we have to cost that, so that because people who inflict this pain on Ghanaians should not get away with it, only for Ghanaians to come and pay for it. So those are the things that I think we need to look at. Then also, another hint to renegotiating the program is that if you look at the cutoff date that the IMF has chosen for Ghana to return to debt sustainability, 2028, is too short. Because it is too short, the magnitude of the adjustment that has to be done within the shortest possible time is so much that it undermines the growth drivers of the economy. Now, the reality of that is that we are actually sacrificing our medium to long-term survivability for short-term praise. Because we want to demonstrate that the program is generating results within the immediate and all of that, and we are returning to debt sustainability within the shortest possible time, only for us to return to that same crisis just right after the program. So that is one level. So let's extend the cutoff date beyond 2028 so that the burden of adjustment will be spread over a longer period of time. That also gives the government room to be able to also implement its social contract with the people of Ghana, which was occasioned on December 7, 2024. That is another level that they should look at. Then also, I have heard people saying the government, the president-elect, should not abolish those COVID-19, e-levy, and the rest of them. Look, the president-elect went around this country and told the people of Ghana that these taxes will be removed. He should not change his mind. There will be no basis for accountability. COVID-19, e-levy remind us of pain. They remind us of incompetence. They remind us of arrogance. They remind us of insensitivity. They should not continue to remain in our books. Again, if you eliminate those taxes, in fact, the fiscal impact is not that substantial. So if you look at how much e-levy is bringing, COVID-19 health levy is bringing, and all those things, in fact, you can delete them, and the going concern of the government will not be compromised. We've looked at the fiscal impact and all of that. Okay, so they have to go. The reason they also have to go is that apart from the fact that they have not really contributed to enhancing the tax buoyancy of this economy, meanwhile, the compliance cost on taxpayers has been huge. You know, nowadays, you know that the banks spend millions of dollars to reconfigure their system to be able to charge e-levy. They spend a lot of money. Businesses spend money to reconfigure their system to be able to comply as charging agents. So the compliance cost of the numerous taxes that we have in this country is counterproductive. Then the other thing the president-elect must do, and I'm expecting to see this in the 2025 budget, they have to merge the straight levies with the standard VAT rate. If you look at the deception in Ghana's VAT system together with the straight levies, it creates an erroneous, a false impression that Ghana's VAT rate is one of the lowest in Africa at 15%. It's simply because we have decoupled the straight levies from the standard VAT rate. If you add the straight levies,
we come to about 21%, right?
21.9% effective incidence of that tax is one of the highest on the continent. Look, the IMF itself, and I will be surprised the IMF if they are not open to this discussion, because the IMF own empirical analysis indicates that if your VAT rate it goes beyond 17-18%, it becomes counterproductive. So the reason we have a high productive cost base of doing business, which undermines the competitiveness of our private sector, is how we are administering our VAT system and the straight levies. Why should we do that? So they have to merge it and peg it at below 18%. If it's lower, it will encourage compliance, right? And also, so that is one level that they have to look at. Then the other thing is that we have to be conscious about costing how much we can make from recovery of looted money. Okay? And we have to cost the gains from governance reforms so that we include that in the program financing rather than unnecessarily burdening Ghanaians. Because anytime government says they are innovative, then they are going to tax the people. Why? We cannot tax our way out of crisis. And the more taxes we impose on Ghanaians and businesses, we are undermining the buffer at the household and private sector level, and we are compromising savings. Any country that is not saving from individual household firm level is not accumulating capital to take advantage of economic opportunities. Those are the things. When you say reset requires a transformative mindset. That boldness to say that, look, that is a way to go. And first and foremost, as a leader, you are willing to lead by example and make sure that within your own party, and your own inner circle, you are able to put your authority over corruption and the rest of them. If you are unable to deal with the corruption within, you cannot deal with the corruption without.
Now, in relation to the taxes, I have heard some people say, for instance, that the COVID levy, perhaps, the NDC has been talking about finding a sustainable means of maintaining the free SHS, because a dedicated source of funding, I beg your pardon. Now, some have said that the COVID-19 levy, for instance, instead of scrapping it, can be, converted into one that will serve as a funding source for the free SHS.
Not really, no. Anytime there has to be an intervention that will bring relief to Ghanaians, we quickly will find a reason why it should not be done. Let me give you a number of reasons. There's something we call communication service tax, right?
And it's a dedicated source of funding for the YEA.
Please, what jobs have been created from there?
Well, they've been doing, some apprenticeship.
For where? Where is it? Look at our unemployment rate. Where is it? There cannot be any justification. Look, free senior high school is not the reason why Ghana has run into debt crisis. Check from 2017 to 2023, 2024. How much have we actually allocated to the free senior high school? If we are able to deal with corruption, bloated contracts, procurement infractions, and cut down on wasteful spending, why can't we sustain free senior high school? In any case, I have a different view on free senior high school. You know what that view is? You may not like it. We can still have a progressive free senior high school where academic facility user fee is free, chairs are provided, textbooks are provided. But if you choose to keep your child in a boarding school, you must be willing to feed your child. Is that okay?
Yeah.
If your child were to be staying with you at home, you will feed your child. So for people who choose to have their children in boarding school, they must be willing to pay. There are so many other Ghanaians who, after BECE, JSS, junior high school, didn't have to go to secondary school. Some have gone to trading, learning vocational, and the rest of them. Nobody feeds them. They are on their own. So the idea is that we can still have free senior high school. Because if you look at the free senior high school, the bulk of the money is spent on feeding. Even the feeding is of low quality. Do you know that out-of-pocket expenditure on senior high school has actually gone up?
We've had a good number of parents say that they are spending a lot more.
Spending much more now than when free senior high school wasn't there. Look, parents have to go through a lot, almost every week, sending food to their children in the boarding school. Parents even wish they could just WhatsApp the jollof rice to their children in school. Go to the new plant stations, bus stops, bus stations. Every week you see parents trooping to the station to go and WhatsApp jollof rice and things to their children in senior high school. The food being served there is despised. So the idea is that let's see how we can take out the boarding fee. Let parents take care of that. Let the government provide the chairs and everything, school fees, no school fees, whatever. But when it comes to feeding fee, let parents take care of that. With that approach, you see that so many people who have taken their children to boarding actually would have preferred that they would be day students and strengthen the community schools. That is another way of doing it. So certainly the free senior high school has to be reviewed. But from where I sit, there can never be any reasonable justification for a party that went around 275 constituencies and told the people of Ghana that COVID-19 health levy, e-levy, and everything will be abolished. And people voted for you, and then after that, you said that I won't do it. Look, let me tell you, the NPP equally promised to abolish those taxes.
And one of the other reasons people are citing, those who are saying that we should not scrap these two taxes are citing, is that you recall that in 2016, the NPP, then in opposition, campaigned on scrapping nuisance taxes, only for them to, after that, introduce more taxes that had, more implication.
All the governments do it now.
Yes.
I've seen where you are coming from. That is not the justification. That is not the justification. And the NPP campaign on the fact that they will move the economy, they will move the economy from taxation to production. Check the 2017 budget. They scrapped the number of those taxes. In fact, the fiscal cost was more than $2 billion, 2 billion cedis. In 2017, they did that also in 2018. That is fiscal relief directly in the pocket of Ghanaians. The reason we had to reintroduce a lot more taxes is not because of the abolishment of those taxes. It has to do with higher cost base of managing government business, which was imposed by Ghanaians. How many regions did the president create from 2017? 6 additional regions. Is that not so?
Yes.
These were cost centers. Then we created Northern Development Authority, Southern this, Southern that. So we are just expanding administrative structures, administrative costs. And our tax base is unable to support that. That is how we should address the situation. Otherwise, look, if we don't focus on wasteful cost cutting and governance reforms that preserves fiscal space for growth enhancing spending, we will continue to keep on these taxes, and next year we have to introduce more and more and more. The future does not lie in more taxes.
Okay.
The future lies in efficiency. Look, now let's come home. Let me give you an example. You know that from independence, right? Ghana and Malaysia, Ghana, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea. In fact, Ghana GDP per capita in 1961, 1962 was higher than South Korea, the newly industrialized nation. But do you know what has happened? If you look at Ghana's tax to GDP ratio, and you can go online and check, compare that to Singapore, compare that to Malaysia, compare that to South Korea, you will see that the marginality is not exceptional. Great. Even if you look at Sub-Saharan African average in terms of our tax to GDP ratio, even though Ghana's own is below the Sub-Saharan African average, when it comes to expenditure to GDP ratio, we compare favorably to these countries. Do you know the difference? What it means is that even though our tax to GDP ratio is low, it has not constrained us from spending the way we have to spend. In economics, it is the spending that stimulates growth. So Ghana has spent relative to the size of our GDP, like Singapore, like Malaysia and others, but Ghana hasn't gotten the growth that these countries have gotten. Do you know the reason?
Why are we not getting the growth?
It's the inefficiency and the corruption. Now that is where the issue is. Those who have gained from this democracy, it's not the private sector, it's not household, it's politicians and their financiers and their patronage. They are the real winners from this democracy. Look, now let's come home. Can you just take a survey and look at the labor size, the employee, the staff size of GMPC, Ghana Gas, Petroleum Commission, and all of them.
Bank of Ghana.
In the last 25 years, look at the growth in the staff numbers of these companies. What productivity are they adding? And if you check, you will realize that the channel of recruitment to all these institutions is through political affiliation.
So
can a country be governed like this and have a future? It's a joke.
So
don't impose more taxes. That is robbery. The problem lies in cutting costs and efficiency. Look, now they tell me, how do you build a flyover at Flower Port at that cost? And many more of that. How much haven't we spent on constructing dams that today potholes on our roads hold more water than constructed dams? Tell me, how are you able to develop out of things like this?
So Prof, essentially,
a research requires a proper diagnosis of what the issues are.
So
okay,
essentially,
now the last point before you
okay.
come in. The last point. Forgive me. Today is Monday morning, so I don't want to talk too much. The last point. Now, this democracy we are practicing, right? From 1993, we have done all those analyses. The cost of operationalizing our democracy has been expanding or increasing exponentially, far higher than the growth in our tax revenue. So we are at the point where the growth in our tax base is unable to sustain the cost of operationalizing our democracy, let alone freeing up space for growth enhancing spending. That is where Ghana is now. So my advice to the president-elect and the people of Ghana is that let's have a proper diagnosis of why development has not happened, and it has happened in other jurisdictions. Even though we have spent relative to the size of our GDP and the rest of them like other countries, but we haven't gotten the growth and the quality of the growth we should. And then finally, do you know that between 2012, hello?
Yes, I'm here. I'm listening to you, Prof.
Do you know that between 2012 and 2021, 2022, a period that covers both NDC and MPP, nearly 85% of all government big ticket procurement were done through sole or single source? Do you know that?
We are told that we run a procurement economy, right?
Yes. So now they tell me, if you're able to allow all these things, why should you impose more taxes to develop? Tell me, which countries have actually developed by taxing their people excessively the way we are doing? We don't wash our face upwards. So reset requires a proper diagnosis of the situation. And we must be honest and speak the truth. I could be wrong in my analysis, but I'll be happy to be engaged. Not that I'll be happy to have the alternative. Why we have not developed? Why is it costing us more to construct a kilometer of road compared to the world average? Are we using cement of higher grade than other countries? Why is it that budgetary allocation to the seat of government in Ghana? Check the staff strength at the presidency. Check the staff strength at the presidency. Are they on job, any particular job schedule? What is their productivity effect? And all these people are on payroll, on V8, fueled, and all of that. This is a joke. Nobody should tell me we should impose more taxes. You have to address all of these things. Okay. Even US, a land of affluency, they are having a whole minister for government efficiency. US is thinking about cost cutting and efficiency. Their tax to GDP ratio is more than 25%. Why should a country like Ghana govern with more than 40 ministers? Who wants to pay for that? If we are mindful to go by the decentralization strategy, and we want to decentralize development and governance and financing, you don't need more ministers. You need to strengthen the local government arrangement, district chief executives, development agents at that level. If you strengthen that, you don't need so many ministers and so many regional ministers. You don't need that. All of these things are imposing costs, and the reason politicians have the incentive to do all of this is that this is the only way they satisfy their people who are the stakeholders of their party. Those who have benefited from this democracy, the real winners, you are not one of them. It's not the household, it's not the private sector. It's politicians across the two main political divide. It's a game. It's a game.
Now,
it's studied under game theory.
Prof, I mean, now let's just focus on the caution that has come from the IMF. I think the IMF has been, praising our progress since we went under the ECF, talking about how we are making steady progress. In the past, there's been the talk about how, the Bretton Woods institutions will talk about how well a government is doing until it exits office or about to exit office. Now, looking at that and the IMF, what the IMF is saying now about us, cautioning us about the gains we have made, and telling us that the gains are fragile and that we need to do a lot more to consolidate it. Does it fit into that narrative that says that they only tell you what the real situation is when a government is out of power?
Well, this is how I would look at it. The IMF is not a perfect institution. The data they relied on largely is also supplied by government and all of that. So you realize that in this country, anytime they say that liquidity challenges are real from 2026, 2027. And I said, yes, they are now coming back to the reality and all of that. So let's look at it from that perspective. In any case, I am not expecting, as a Ghanaian, knowing very well the works of the IMF and the Bretton Woods institution, to sleep and wake up and think that this is the IMF that will come and transform our economy for us. No. The best helping hand that we can find is at the end of our own arm. We must take responsibility. If the IMF tells us that all is not well, and our data that we have here and the living conditions of Ghanaians have improved, we should choose that. We should choose that.
All right, Prof. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Always a pleasure talking to you.
God bless you. Go and have some breakfast. Bye-bye.
All right, Prof. You had us speak to Professor Godfred Alusa-Bokwin. He's a finance professor with the University of Ghana Business School. Talked about some of the areas that, the incoming government must touch on, especially when it comes to renegotiating with the IMF. One of the key points he makes is that the cutoff points needs to be extended to beyond 2028 to allow room for us to implement some of these debt sustainability measures in proportions that will not have significant impact on the citizenry. That when the period is short, it requires that you do a lot more within a short time. Like we had to do the DDEP. Imagine it was for a longer period. Perhaps it may have staggered, and then the impact would be less felt. He talked about how structurally the program, itself was not properly designed, and so that is something that the incoming administration must pay attention to. Says they must also recover the loot. It will help in shoring up our revenues and all that, knowing that the current administration has been talking about the Operation Recover or Loot. And then one of the key campaign promises, scrapping of the COVID levy as well as the e-levy. Some people have talked about the need not to scrap those because it's a source of revenue, and successive governments have come into government with a promise of scrapping, only for them to scrap and then implement new taxes. Well, he says that, listen, these two taxes, you've gone around the country promising to scrap them. If you don't, it will smack of bad faith. And in fact, scrapping them actually would do more for the country. And he says what our major problem has been is that usually when we cut these taxes, we introduce new ones because we do not cut down on our expenditure. That increasingly operationalizing our democracy has been increasing. The cost of operationalizing our democracy has been increasing to unsustainable levels, and therefore we need to pause. If we're talking about reset, there must be a proper diagnosis as to why we are expending so much as expected, but we are not seeing the corresponding development in the country. He says one of the major reasons we are seeing that is because most of the beneficiaries of operationalizing this democracy has been to the politicians and not you and I. Dear listeners. Well, it's still the Morning Star here on Star 103.5 FM.